Here's a man who could put away a bottle of champagne before lunch, dictate 4,000 words of history before dinner, sign an order deciding whether 100,000 men lived or died, and still take a nap in a darkened room with a silk mask over his eyes. That is not a character from a novel. That was a real person. And in the worst hour the 20th century ever produced, he was the last thing standing between civilization and something that wanted to eat it. He saved Europe. He also sat at the head of a government whose choices helped starve millions of people in Bengal. A statue in one country, a swear word in another. Same man. In some cases, the same decade. His name was Winston Churchill. But I am not going to start you off with the cigar and the victory sign. I want to start on the day his life caved in. Go back to the spring of 1915, a thin strip of Turkish coastline called Gallipoli. Men are dying on beaches so exposed that some of them are hit in the water before their boots ever touch sand. Australians, New Zealanders, Britons, Irishmen, Indians, Frenchmen. Month after month of it. By the time the whole thing is abandoned, Allied dead and wounded runs somewhere past 180,000, and the historians still argue about the real number. And the plan behind it, the clever, war-shortening side door plan, belongs to one man, the First Lord of the Admiralty, 40 years old, Winston Churchill. He is thrown out. His name turns into a shorthand for reckless. Men in his own party say, with something close to enjoyment, that he is finished for good. Now jump 25 years. May 1940. German armor is cutting through France faster than the French High Command can redraw the maps. 300,000 British soldiers are being squeezed into a shrinking pocket around a fishing port called Dunkirk. Norway is gone. Denmark is gone. Holland and Belgium are going, while people are still talking about Norway. And the man Britain hands the wheel to, at the exact moment the car leaves the cliff, is that same discredited, over-drinking, over-talking, 65-year-old failure from 1915. So here is the question this whole thing is built around. How does a man fail that publicly, that often, for that long, and then turn out to be the one person in the room who gets it right when it actually counts? I think the answer is uncomfortable. I think he was useful in 1940 because of the exact flaws that made him useless in 1935. But to see that, you have to go back a lot further, to a boy nobody came for. Blenheim Palace, Oxfordshire. Not a house, a monument, handed to the Churchill family by a grateful nation for winning a war. Winston is born there in November 1874 into more privilege than almost any child alive. And he is one of the loneliest kids you will ever read about. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, is a rising political star with a vicious tongue and a career that burns out early. He barely looks at his son. When he does look, he decides the boy is a waster who will end up a nobody in a shabby regiment. Randolph dies in his 40s, mind and body wrecked by an illness his doctors called syphilis, though modern historians argue about the diagnosis. Winston is 20. They never have the conversation. His mother, Jenny Jerome, is an American beauty who moves through London society the way weather moves through a valley. Magnetic, mostly elsewhere. Winston writes her letters from school begging her to come and see him. She usually doesn't. You want to know who actually raised the man who later stared down Hitler? A nanny, Mrs. Elizabeth Everest. She wrote to him, worried about him, darned his socks, loved him with no strategy behind it. He paid for her headstone. Decades later, an old man with the world on his desk still kept her photograph where he could see it. School is a disaster. At his first prep school, he is beaten so badly his family pull him out. At Harrow, he sits near the bottom and makes a hobby of being difficult. He fails the entrance exams for Sandhurst. Not once, 3 times. Read that again. The man whose speeches now get taught as the high water mark of the English language could not get into a military college. Then something happens at Sandhurst that had never once happened in a classroom. He likes it. Not the books, the doing. Maps, horses, ground, the practical geometry of a fight. And for the first time in his life, somebody looks at Winston Churchill and says, "You are good at this." He is 20. He is in a hurry. And he has decided the fastest route to Mattering runs through somewhere people are shooting at each other. Cuba, 1895. The island is in revolt against Spain, and a very young British officer talks his way in as an observer. He does not want to observe. He wants to stand near the noise. He gets shot at on his 21st birthday and, by his own account, rather enjoys the experience. But the thing that actually changes his life on that trip is not the gunfire. He starts filing newspaper dispatches home, and he gets paid for them. A young officer's pay was pocket change. A young officer with a byline in a London paper was building something else, a name. That is the spark. Before he is old enough to drink legally in some of the places he would later govern, he works out that words travel further than bullets. Then India, the northwest frontier, garrison towns, heat that sits on you like a wet coat. And the boy who would not read at Harrow suddenly starts reading like a man trying to make up a decade in 18 months. Gibbon, Plato, Darwin, Macaulay, economics, philosophy, old parliamentary debates. His mother posts the books out in crates. He is educating himself in the middle of nowhere, and the frame he builds in his head during those months is the one he uses for the next 60 years. He picks up something uglier out there too. India is where he absorbs the idea, unexamined, in the water supply of his entire class, that the British sit at the top of a natural ladder and everybody else is stacked underneath. He carries that to his grave. It makes him the wrong man on one continent while making him the right man on another. Hold on to that. It comes back, and when it comes back, it kills people. On the frontier, he watches something that quietly frightens him. Modern weapons meeting old courage. Machine guns against swords. That is not a battle. That is arithmetic. Then Sudan, Omdurman. Churchill rides in one of the last serious cavalry charges in British history, and afterwards he is sick about what he saw. Thousands of Sudanese dead in an afternoon. Wounded men finished off where they lay. The British and Egyptian wounded of the wrong nationality left more or less to sort themselves out. He writes about it with real disgust. So which is he? A convinced imperialist who thinks certain people cannot govern themselves? Or a man revolted when those same people get treated like vermin? Both, at once, permanently. If you want one sentence that explains Churchill, try this one. He never resolved a contradiction in his life. He just kept walking with it. Out of Sudan and India come two books. Not soldiers' memoirs, proper writing, with pace and color and jokes in it. They sell. His name starts to mean something in London drawing rooms, which is when he does something reckless. He quits. He is 24. No money of his own worth talking about, no father to open doors, no political machine behind him, and he announces he is standing for Parliament. He loses. Most people would take that as a message. Churchill takes it as a scheduling problem. Because a war has just started in South Africa, and he has already worked out that the fast route into British public life runs through a newspaper column, not a ballot box. He sails for the Boer War as a correspondent, civilian, no rank, no authority over anybody. November 1899. An armored train he is riding on gets ambushed and derailed. And here is the part no publicist could have invented. The journalist takes charge. Under fire, Churchill organizes the clearing of the wreck and gets the engine moving with wounded men aboard. Then he is captured. Prisoner of war camp in Pretoria. You would think that is the end of it. Humiliating. He escapes. Over the wall at night, on his own, with a few slabs of chocolate and no map, in a country where every farmer with a rifle is looking for him. There is a reward poster with his name on it. He hides in a coal mine, rides freight trains, nearly gets caught more times than he can count, and eventually crosses into Portuguese East Africa. When he walks back into British lines, he is not a reporter anymore. He is the front page of every paper in Britain. 25 years old and famous. Guess what he does with it? Goes home. Stands for Parliament again, same town, Oldham, and wins. The boy his father wrote off is now sitting in the House of Commons, and within 4 years he does the thing that costs him for the next 4 decades. He walks across the floor, abandons the Conservatives, his father's party, his class's party, and joins the Liberals. Traitor, they call him, turncoat. Some of them are still saying it in 1940, with the country on fire, while they decide whether to hand him the keys. Around the same time, he meets Clementine Hosier, sharp, principled, completely unimpressed by theatrics. They marry in 1942. She spends 57 years telling him things nobody else in Britain dared say to him, including, at the height of the war, that he had become unbearable to work for. A lot of the time, she is the only break he has. 5 children. One of them, Marigold, dies at 2, of an infection antibiotics would have shrugged off 20 years later. Someone who was in the house said Clementine's scream was something she never forgot. It is one of the very few things that genuinely breaks him. But the career is going vertical, and the next job puts his hands on the biggest machine on earth. The Liberals sweep in. At 33, he is president of the Board of Trade. At 35, Home Secretary. Police, prisons, the internal security of the kingdom. And the aristocrat surprises everybody by turning up as a reformer. Labor exchanges so unemployed men can find work. Limits on hours in the mines. Backing for the machinery of early social insurance. He works alongside Lloyd George on a program that, decades later, gets recognized as the skeleton of the welfare state. He also sends troops toward a mining dispute at Tony Pandy, and Welsh mining towns curse his name for 3 generations. The details are messier than the legend. He actually held the soldiers back and sent police first, but the legend is what stuck. Both things are true. With him, they usually are. Then 1911. He is 36 and he is made First Lord of the Admiralty, political master of the Royal Navy, the largest, most expensive fighting force on the planet, and the load-bearing wall of the entire British Empire. He throws himself at it, pushes the fleet from coal to oil, backs naval aviation while senior officers still think airplanes are a hobby, learns to fly himself, badly, and keeps going after crashes until Clementine makes him stop. And around him, Europe is loading itself like a shotgun. Alliances, colonies, dreadnought races, the Balkans coming apart at the seams. Everybody can see it. Almost nobody believes it. June 1914 года. Sarajevo. One Serbian nationalist, 2 shots, an archduke dead in a car that took a wrong turn. 6 weeks later, the continent is at war. And the man responsible for the world's greatest navy is about to have the worst idea of his life. By the end of 1914, the Western Front has stopped being a war and turned into a geological formation. 2 lines of trenches from the Channel to Switzerland. Attacks that gain 400 yards and cost 20,000 men. Churchill looks at that map and refuses to accept it. There has to be a side door. He finds one. The Dardanelles, the narrow water passage leading to Constantinople. Force it with the fleet and the prizes stack up like dominoes. Knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war. Open a supply line to Russia. Pull German divisions east. Maybe drag the whole Balkans in behind you. On paper, it is the most imaginative strategic idea any Allied leader produces in the entire war. In practice, everything that can go wrong does. The naval attack fails on mines nobody has properly swept, so it becomes a landing. But not for weeks, which hands the Ottoman defenders and a German general called Liman von Sanders all the time they need. When the troops go ashore in April 1915, the high ground is already held. Machine guns look straight down onto the beaches. And then the exact thing Churchill was trying to escape happens all over again, on worse ground, in worse heat. Trenches close enough to throw a grenade. Dysentery. Flies in numbers, men wrote home about because there was no other way to describe them. Bodies out in the open that nobody could reach. Attacks that die in the first 30 seconds. 9 months of it. Then, evacuation, which is the only genuinely brilliant operation of the whole campaign, and it is a retreat. Here is the cruel part.
The idea might have worked.
Faster execution, different beaches, a commander who pushed inland on the first afternoon instead of stopping for tea. Historians have been arguing about it for a century. But it did not work. The public needed a face, and the face was his. He is removed from the Admiralty. The Conservatives make his exclusion a condition of joining the government. The man who had been in a hurry since he was 20 is suddenly 40 years old with an empty diary. So what does a broken politician do? He puts a uniform back on and asks to be sent to France. This is one of the strangest chapters in modern political history, and hardly anyone knows it. A former cabinet minister, an aristocrat, a man who was running the Royal Navy the previous summer, spends months commanding a battalion of the Royal Scots Fusiliers on the Western Front. In the mud, under shell fire, in a sector where a dugout he had walked out of minutes earlier took a direct hit.
And by the accounts of the men who served under him, he is good at it. He fights the war he can actually reach. Better rations, dry socks, steel helmets, fewer pointless punishments. His officers were expecting a posturing politician on a publicity tour. What they got was somebody inspecting the line at 3 a.m. Those months rearrange him. He had ordered men into fire from a desk in London. Now he knows what he was ordering. Meanwhile, the official inquiry into the Dardanelles reports back, and it does not hang the whole thing on him. The concept was defensible. The execution and the men who fumbled it were the problem. Lloyd George, now Prime Minister, takes the political risk and brings him back. Minister of Munitions. Not glamorous. Shells, factories, unions, strikes, production quotas. And it matters more than any battle because the First World War is not decided by generalship. Germany won a great many of the battles. What Germany could not win was the industrial argument. Whoever could make more, move more, and feed more for longer was going to be standing at the end. So Churchill spends the last year of the war learning how to run an economy at war. 22 years later, that is the exact skill Britain needs from him. November 1918. Germany asks for terms. And in the wreckage of the old world, Churchill immediately finds himself a new enemy, one he will chase for the rest of his life. For him, Bolshevism is not a political movement. It is a plague. He describes it in the language of infection and vermin, and he means every word. He wants serious intervention in the Russian Civil War, not the token British force in the north, a real effort to kill the new regime before it can stand up. He loses that argument completely. Britain is exhausted. The public will not wear another war. The whites collapse, the Bolsheviks win. He never lets it go. That hatred makes him look like a lunatic in the 1920s, a hypocrite in 1941, and a prophet in 1946. Then the Colonial Office and the carve-up of the Ottoman Middle East. Britain and France draw lines across Mesopotamia and the Levant with the confidence of men who will never have to live there. Iraq, Palestine, Transjordan. Mandates, which is a diplomatic word for colonies with better paperwork. Churchill chairs the Cairo Conference that installs kings and fixes borders that are still bleeding. And when revolt breaks out, he writes the minute that has followed him ever since. He is, he says, strongly in favor of using poisoned gas against uncivilized tribes. Now, be careful here, because this one gets thrown around a lot. Read the full memorandum, and it is clear he is talking about tear gas, not chlorine. His argument is that making a man's eyes water is more humane than blowing him apart with high explosive, and he says so in as many words. It was never deployed. The quote is real. The meaning is narrower than the internet version. But look at the phrase he reached for. Uncivilized tribes. Take the most generous reading available, and it still tells you exactly how his mind sorted human beings. Civilized people, to whom rules apply, and everybody else. Ireland is the same story, with worse methods and a better ending.
Churchill backs sending the Black and Tans. Demobilized soldiers, dropped into a guerrilla war with no policing training and no discipline worth a name. They burn Cork. They shoot into crowds. They turn a generation of Irish moderates into Republicans. And then the same Churchill sits in the room in the 2000 What's-He Divide and helps negotiate the treaty that ends the war and creates the Irish Free State. Terror and diplomacy from one desk inside 18 months. He genuinely did not see the contradiction. Then the wheel turns again. In the 2000 What's-He Divide, the government collapses and he loses his seat. Loses again the next year. The Liberal Party is disintegrating underneath him, so he does the unforgivable thing a second time and crosses back to the Conservatives. Anyone can rat, he says. It takes a certain amount of ingenuity to re-rat, and somehow it works. And Conservatives win, and Churchill, the man they had been calling a traitor for 20 years, is made Chancellor of the Exchequer, second most powerful job in the country. He is now holding Britain's finances. And he is about to drop them. And takes Britain back onto the gold standard at the pre-war exchange rate. I know, it sounds like a footnote. It was a wrecking ball. Setting the pound that high made every British export too expensive overnight. Coal, steel, ships, textiles, the industries the country actually lived on, priced themselves out of the world market in a single budget. Owners responded the only way they knew. Cut wages, cut jobs. Unemployment set like concrete. By the country was in a general strike. Keynes wrote a pamphlet about it called The Economic Consequences of Mr. Churchill, which is probably the most polite demolition in the history of economics. Churchill later called it the worst decision of his life. Not the worst financial decision, the worst decision. And notice the pattern, because this is the whole man in one word. He was certain. Certain at Gallipoli, certain about gold, certain about India, certain in May 2000. Certainty was not his flaw, and it was not his gift. It was his engine. When he was wrong, it drove the country into a wall. When he was right, it was the only thing loud enough to be heard over the panic. In 2045, the Conservatives lose. Within months, Wall Street collapses and takes the world economy with it. A national government gets assembled out of all parties to handle the crisis, and there is no place in it for Winston Churchill. He is 55, nearly 30 years in Parliament, and he is about to spend the next decade being right about the most important thing on earth while absolutely nobody listens. They call them the wilderness years, and the phrase is too gentle. He is not resting. He is shouting into a room that has decided he is a crank. Two things keep him alive. The first is money, which means writing, at a volume that is difficult to believe. Books, articles, essays, coming out at a rate that would exhaust a newsroom. Because his life costs a fortune. Chartwell, the staff, the cigars, the champagne, the gambling losses. He writes his multi-volume history of the First World War. Then he starts the biography of his ancestor, the first Duke of Marlborough. 4 volumes, comfortably over 500,000 words. And he is not really writing about Marlborough. He is writing about a man who was underestimated, sold out by his own political class, and who turned out to be the only person capable of stopping a continental tyrant.
He is writing a job application to history. The second thing is Germany. January 1933. Hitler takes power, and most of the British establishment shrugs. The Germans have picked a nasty right-wing government. Unpleasant, but at least they are not communists. Maybe a strong Germany even balances Moscow. And besides, after 1918, weren't we rather hard on them? Churchill looks at exactly the same facts and sees the end of the world. He watches Germany dismantle its own democracy inside 18 months, watches the persecution of German Jews start, watches rearmament happen in open defiance of the treaty, an air force that officially does not exist, a conscript army that officially cannot exist, and he starts making the same speech, month after month, year after year, in a half-empty chamber. Rearm, build aircraft, build a fighter defense,
The gap is closing, and then it will be gone. They call him a warmonger, a scaremonger, a man who never met a crisis he did not want to make bigger. And here's the real tragedy of it. There is a specific reason nobody trusts him, and it is entirely his own fault. Through the early 30s, the biggest domestic argument in Britain and India. Both major parties accept that India has to be given a serious measure of self-government. Churchill sets himself against it with a violence that shocks even his allies. He calls Gandhi, a trained barrister and a formidable one, a half-naked fakir. He argues Indians are not capable of governing themselves. He burns years and every scrap of credibility he has trying to block the India Act. He loses. Of course he loses. And then the same voice starts warning about Hitler, and half of Westminster files it in the same drawer. That's just Winston. He was hysterical about Gandhi. He's hysterical about Germany. Sit with that for a second. His racism about India is a direct cause of Britain not rearming fast enough against Germany.
The two things are wired together, and the clock keeps running. 1935. Italy takes Abyssinia. 1936. German troops walk back into the Rhineland, a bluff a single, firm French division could have called, and nobody calls it. 1938. Austria is annexed. Swastikas over Vienna. Then Czechoslovakia. Hitler demands the Sudetenland. Chamberlain flies to Munich and comes home holding a piece of paper. Peace for our time. The country is euphoric, crowds in the street. And Churchill stands up in the Commons and says, "You were offered a choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war anyway." 6 months later, German troops take the rest of Czechoslovakia, and the paper is worth exactly what it was printed on. He was right. Publicly, provably, unbearably right. And Chamberlain still will not have him in the government. Until the 1st of September, 1939, German tanks cross into Poland. On the 3rd of September, Britain declares war. And that same day, Chamberlain, out of options and out of excuses, puts Churchill back in the cabinet, at the Admiralty, the exact job he was thrown out of 24 years earlier. And a signal goes out to every ship in the Royal Navy. Winston is back. He is 64. He has been written off as finished at least 3 separate times, and he is still not Prime Minister, because the wall between him and the top job is standing. It gets knocked down by a disaster he is partly responsible for. Winter of 1930 into spring into Soar, the phony war. Poland is destroyed and carved up in 5 weeks, and then nothing happens. The French sit behind the Maginot Line. The British sit next to them. Europe holds its breath for 7 months. Churchill spends those months looking north, at Norway. Neutral, and the route by which Swedish iron ore reaches German steel mills. He wants to move first. Hitler moves first. April 3000 Soar. Denmark falls in a day. German troops land the length of the Norwegian coast. The British counter-operation is late, undersupplied, and badly coordinated, and it fails. So in early May, Parliament holds a debate that is officially about Norway and is actually about whether Neville Chamberlain is capable of running a war. 3 days. Leo Amery quotes Cromwell at him across the chamber. "In the name of God, go." And when Churchill tries to take the blame for Norway, which, given his job, he genuinely deserved a share of, Lloyd George stops him and tells him not to let himself be used as an air raid shelter. The vote comes. Chamberlain technically wins and politically dies. Dozens of his own MPs vote against him. He resigns. 10th of May, 1940. 2 candidates, Lord Halifax, calm, respectable, universally trusted, the establishment's clear preference, and the King's, and Winston Churchill, who is none of those things. Halifax takes himself out of it. He is in the House of Lords, which makes governing awkward, and by his own admission, he knows he is not the man for this particular week. So it goes to Churchill. And on the morning it does, Germany invades Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg.
He wrote afterwards that he felt as if his whole life had been a preparation for that hour. He also went to bed that night convinced he would not fail, which, given what was coming, was either magnificent or completely insane. The next 20 days decide the century. It goes wrong faster than anyone thought was physically possible. German armor comes through the Ardennes, the forest everyone agreed tanks could not use, and reaches the Channel in 10 days. The French front is not pushed back, it is cut in half. The British Expeditionary Force, 400,000 men counting the French and Belgians beside them, gets pressed into a pocket around Dunkirk. Churchill flies to Paris and asks where the strategic reserve is. The French commander tells him there isn't one. He said later it was the single most shocking moment of his life. And in London, in a small room, the actual decision of the war is being made, not on a beach, in a cabinet room. Lord Halifax, Foreign Secretary, makes a case that is not cowardly and not stupid. It goes like this. France is finished. Our army is about to be destroyed. Italy is not in yet, and Mussolini could carry a message. If we are ever going to find out what terms exist, it is now, while we still have an army and a fleet to bargain with. Waiting until we have nothing is not courage, it is negligence. That is a serious argument. Chamberlain, still in the War Cabinet, leans toward hearing it out. Churchill's answer is not sentimental either. It is that any negotiation, once you start it, cannot be stopped. The moment Britain sits down, the will to fight drains out of the country, and whatever Hitler offers on Monday will be worse by Friday.
A nation that starts bargaining from weakness ends up disarmed. The argument runs across several meetings over several days, and it is close, genuinely close. Then Churchill does something clever and slightly underhanded. He calls in the 25 or so ministers outside the War Cabinet, men who have been nowhere near this room and have heard none of it, and he talks to them. He tells them he has thought it through, and that any terms on offer would leave Britain a slave state under a German puppet government. And then this. If this long island story of ours is to end at last, let it end only when each one of us lies choking in his own blood upon the ground. They come out of their chairs, senior politicians crowding round him, shouting, slapping him on the back. Churchill walks back into the War Cabinet with the whole government behind him, and the negotiation question dies. It is never seriously reopened. That is the moment. Not a battle, a meeting. And out on the coast, the impossible is happening. Operation Dynamo. The Navy lifts men off the beaches while the Luftwaffe works them over. And behind the destroyers come the little ships. Pleasure yachts, fishing boats, Thames barges, craft with no business anywhere near a war zone, crossing the channel to take soldiers off a beach in water too shallow for anything bigger. 9 days, over 300,000 men brought home. Every piece of heavy equipment left behind. An army with no tanks, no artillery, and French sand still in its boots. But an army. Trained men, home, alive. The core of everything that comes next. Churchill goes to the Commons and does the thing nobody else could do. He calls it what it is first. Wars are not won by evacuations. And then he says the words, "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." France signs an armistice weeks later, and on the 18th of June, he stands up again. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that, if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour. 3 speeches in 6 weeks. Blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We shall fight on the beaches. This was their finest hour. Now look at what he is actually promising, because people misread this constantly. He is not promising victory soon. He is not promising it will be all right. He is promising blood and a long road and suffering, and that it will be worth it. That is a harder sell. It is also a much stronger one. Optimism cracks the moment things get worse. He had already told them things were going to get worse. Then the sky fills up. Summer 1940. The Luftwaffe comes for the airfields and the radar stations, because you cannot invade an island until you own the air above it. Spitfires and Hurricanes go up to meet them, flown by British pilots and by Poles and Czechs who had already lost their own countries and had a very personal view of the matter. Fighter command bends and does not break. German losses stop being sustainable. By September, Hitler postpones the invasion, then he shelves it, then he stops mentioning it. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. So instead comes the Blitz. Bombers over London night after night, then Coventry, Birmingham, Liverpool, Glasgow, Hull. Tens of thousands of civilians dead, whole streets removed from the map. And Churchill walks through them. In the rubble, in a hat, cigar in his mouth, 2 fingers up. Yes, it was theater. It was also true. He cried in public more than once, standing in what was left of somebody's neighborhood. And the people in those streets, who had every right to blame the government for the state of the shelters, cheered him anyway. Britain is alone. The Atlantic convoys are being sunk faster than they can be replaced, and the country is quietly going bankrupt. He's betting on 2 things. The first is America. He writes to Roosevelt constantly, flattery, argument, something close to begging. Roosevelt wants to help and is boxed in by a public with no appetite for another European war. So Roosevelt finds a side door. Lend-Lease, March 1941 года. Weapons, food, ships, on credit, not entry into the war. But it keeps Britain breathing. The second bet is uglier and smarter. Churchill is betting that Hitler cannot stop. June 1941, Operation Barbarossa. 3 million men go east into the Soviet Union, and Churchill, who spent 20 years trying to strangle Bolshevism, goes on the radio that same night and pledges everything Britain has to Stalin. Asked how he could possibly justify it, he says, "If Hitler invaded hell, I would find something nice to say about the devil in the House of Commons." Then December 1941 года, Pearl Harbor. The United States is in. Churchill wrote that he went to bed that night and slept the sleep of the saved and thankful. He had done the arithmetic. American industry plus Soviet manpower plus time equals a dead Germany. It would take years and cost millions of lives, but it had stopped being in doubt. He had won the war. And now, he had 4 years left to do the things that stain him permanently. 1942 is a humiliating year for the British Empire in Asia. Singapore, the fortress, the anchor of British power east of Suez, surrenders in February with around 80,000 men taken prisoner. Churchill calls it the worst disaster in British military history. Burma goes. Japanese aircraft appear over the Bay of Bengal. And then, in 1943, Bengal starves. It is not one decision. Burma had fallen, and Burmese rice with it. British authorities ran denial policies along the Bengal coast, removing boats and rice stocks so an invader could not use them, which also removed the transport and the food local people used. A cyclone wrecked part of the harvest. Provincial governments blocked grain moving between Indian provinces. Merchants hoarded. Prices went vertical. Soldiers and war industries got fed first. Estimates of the dead run from roughly 800,000 to 3 million. Most of the widely cited figures sit around 2 to 3 million. People ate grass. They ate their seed stock. Families walked to Calcutta and died on the pavements of a city where the restaurants were still serving. Churchill's government was asked, more than once, to divert shipping to bring grain in. It refused or cut the request on the grounds that shipping was needed for the war. When the scale finally landed in the autumn of 1943, serious grain did move. Over 1 million tons reached Bengal between then and the end of 1942. By then, most of the dying had already happened. What is not in dispute is how he talked about it. He asked why, if the shortage was so bad, Gandhi hadn't died yet. He made remarks about Indians breeding like rabbits. His own Secretary of State for India wrote in his diary that on this subject Churchill's attitude was not very different from Hitler's on Jews. His defenders point at a global shipping crisis, a real Japanese threat, incompetent provincial administration, and no intent to kill anyone. That is largely accurate. His critics point out he was told in detail, repeatedly, and the requests kept getting cut. That is also accurate. You can hold both. He did not design a famine. He did run a system that treated Bengali lives as a lower priority line item. And that ranking came straight out of the beliefs he picked up as a young officer 40 years earlier, and never once went back and checked.
The same year, the air war over Germany shifts to area bombing, not factories, cities. The stated aim, in writing, is breaking German civilian morale and dehousing the workforce. Hamburg, July 1943. A firestorm that kills something on the order of 37,000 people in a few nights. Then Cologne, Berlin, Kassel. Then February 1945, Dresden. 796 RAF Lancasters, followed by American raids. A firestorm in a city packed with refugees fleeing the Eastern Front. The best current estimate, from a German historians' commission that went through the records, is around 25,000 dead. Wilder numbers circulated for decades. Most of them were planted by Nazi propaganda and then recycled by people who should have checked. The war was effectively decided. The Soviets were on the Oder, and Churchill, who had pushed hard for area bombing, wrote a memo afterwards distancing himself from it and asking whether terror bombing should continue. His own air chiefs made him withdraw it and write a softer one, which tells you two things. He knew what it looked like, and he made sure his name ended up on the right side of the paper. So, the man who stopped Hitler used methods that would today be argued over in a courtroom. Both of those facts belong in the same sentence, and any version of this story that hands you only one of them is selling you something. June 1944, D-Day. Around 156,000 men land in Normandy in a single day. Churchill was obsessive about the planning, and it is not hard to see why. He had run an amphibious landing against prepared positions before. It was called Gallipoli. He interfered so relentlessly that his commanders begged him to go away, and he announced he would watch the landings from a warship until the king told him that if he was going, the king was going too, which was the only argument that ever worked on him. The landings hold. France opens up.
Paris is liberated in August, and alongside the fighting, Churchill is in the rooms where the post-war world is being drawn. Tehran in 1943, Yalta in February 1945. Roosevelt, Stalin, Churchill. He is the weakest of the three, and he knows it. Britain is broke and out of men. America has the money in the factories. The Soviet Union has an army standing on the ground they are arguing about. He tries everything. In Moscow in 1944, he actually writes percentages on a half sheet of paper. Romania, 90% Soviet. Greece, 90% British. Yugoslavia, 50-50. He slides it across the table. Stalin ticks it and hands it back. Churchill suggests burning it. Stalin tells him to keep it. It was worth almost nothing, and Churchill knew it. Territory belongs to whoever has soldiers standing on it. And by 1945, the Red Army is standing on Poland, Hungary, Romania, Czechoslovakia, and half of Germany. Poland is the wound. Britain went to war in 1939 over Polish independence. And in 1945, Poland is handed to a Soviet-installed government with its borders shoved a couple of hundred miles west. Churchill fought over it and lost. Roosevelt, dying and convinced he could manage Stalin personally, would not back him. April 1945. Hitler shoots himself in a bunker. 7th of May, Germany surrenders. Churchill stands on a balcony in front of a crowd that has been waiting 6 years for permission to be happy.
3 months later, atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and it is over everywhere. Around 60 million people are dead. Europe is rubble. Two superpowers are watching each other across a continent that used to run the world. And in July 1945, before Japan has even surrendered, Britain holds a general election. Churchill loses. Not narrowly. Labour takes a landslide. Think about how that lands on a man. He saved the country, and the country said, "Thank you, now go."
But the voters were not being ungrateful. They were being specific. They remembered the 30s, the dole queues, the means test, the slums. Churchill was the man for the emergency. Labour was offering a health service, pensions, housing, security. Britain wanted the war finished and the peace different, and it did not believe he was the man for the second half. Clementine suggested it might be a blessing in disguise. Churchill said it seemed quite effectively disguised. He is 70, and he is not finished, because he has spotted the next thing before anybody else. Again. March 1946, a small college town in Fulton, Missouri, with President Truman sitting behind him on the platform. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. The phrase was not his invention. It had been used before, including by Goebbels. Churchill made it permanent. The reaction was hostile. American papers accused him of trying to drag the United States into a quarrel with a wartime ally. Stalin compared him to Hitler. Within 2 years, Czechoslovakia had a communist coup, and Berlin was under blockade. Right again. Early, unpopular, and right. The same trick he pulled in 3 He spent those years arguing for a united Europe, too. In Zurich, in 3 he called for what he named a kind of United States of Europe, with Britain, of course, as a friendly sponsor standing slightly outside it. He fought Indian independence to the last, and lost that as well. India and Pakistan are born in 3 and partition kills somewhere between several 100,000 and 1 million people, and uproots perhaps 14 million more. And the estimates vary wildly depending on who is counting. Churchill said this proved him right. You could argue just as easily that a rushed, badly managed British exit was part of the catastrophe. And he wrote 6 volumes on the Second World War. A magnificent, self-serving, indispensable, unreliable monument. He was completely open about the method. History will be kind to me, he said, for I intend to write it. In 1951, the Conservatives edge back in, and Churchill is Prime Minister again at 76. The second term is a quiet coda. Rationing wound down, houses built, the nuclear age handled. The start of a serious attempt to talk to Moscow instead of only about it. In 1953, he wins the Nobel Prize. Not peace, literature. And he is enormously, almost childishly proud of it. It is a prize for the thing he did in the gaps between everything else. That same June, at a dinner at Downing Street, he has a serious stroke. The left side of his body is partly paralyzed. His speech goes, and it is hidden. From the public, from most of the cabinet, from Parliament, with the cooperation of newspaper owners who agreed to say nothing. Officially, the Prime Minister is tired and resting in the country. He claws his way back. He is chairing cabinet again within months and holds power for nearly 2 more years, mostly because he cannot bear to let go and does not think Anthony Eden is up to it. He was right about Eden, incidentally. April 1955. He finally resigns. He is 80. He turns down a dukedom because taking it would mean leaving the Commons, and he cannot picture himself anywhere else. He stays an MP for another 9 years, appearing less and less. Father of the House, 64 years in Parliament. The last years are quiet. Chartwell, painting, hundreds of watercolors and oils, some of them genuinely good. The south of France, Clementine, always. 57 years of marriage. Not all of it is peaceful. His son Randolph tries to repeat his father's career, cannot, and drinks. His daughter Diana takes her own life in 1663, and Churchill is sinking into the depressions he had been calling his
black dog, since he was a young man, with less and less to distract him from them. More strokes. A broken hip in Monte Carlo. Kennedy makes him an honorary citizen of the United States in 1963, and he is too frail to travel, so his son reads the reply for him. On the 10th of January 1965, he has a severe stroke. He lasts 2 weeks. He dies on the 24th of January 1965, aged 90, 70 years to the day after his father. The state funeral is the largest the world had seen. He lies in state in Westminster Hall for 3 days, and something over 300,000 people queue in January to walk past the coffin. The service is at St. Paul's, the cathedral photographed standing in the smoke of the Blitz. The Queen attends, which broke protocol, deliberately. Then the coffin goes up the Thames by launch, and along the wharves of the Pool of London, the great dockside cranes bow their jibs as it passes. Dockers, most of whom never voted Conservative in their lives, lowering their machines for an old Tory aristocrat.
He is buried in a village churchyard at Bladon, within sight of Blenheim Palace, where he was born 90 years earlier. Which leaves the only question that was ever really worth asking. What was he? Savior of civilization, or an imperialist whose beliefs helped kill millions? Great statesman, or a reckless gambler who happened to be dealt the right hand once? All of it, at once. That is not a dodge, it is the actual answer. And refusing it is how you end up with either a plaster saint or a cartoon villain, neither of which is any use to you. The failures are real, and they are not small. Gallipoli, the gold standard, the black and tans. Years spent obstructing Indian self-government in language that was ugly even to men who agreed with him. Bengal, Dresden. And then there is the other column. From 1933, he saw it, while the informed, sensible, decent people of his own country were explaining why Hitler was manageable. He said the opposite, in public, for 6 years, at the cost of his career. And he was right. And in May 1934, he made a call that a rational man could easily have made the other way. So let's actually run it, because the counterfactual is the strongest argument in his favor. Say Halifax gets it. Say Britain opens talks through Rome after France falls. What are the terms? Almost certainly generous-looking ones. Keep your fleet, keep your empire, accept German dominance of the continent. Hitler wanted that deal. Britain was never his real target. His war was always going east. Britain takes it. Now what? There is no unsinkable aircraft carrier off the coast of France, no base for the bombing campaign, no North African front, no Italian front, no Normandy. Lend-Lease has nowhere to go, and American opinion has no reason to move. The Soviet Union fights Nazi Germany alone, across the whole width of Europe. Either the Soviets lose, and the Holocaust extends across the entire East, and a Nazi empire runs from the Atlantic to the Urals, or the Soviets win alone, at a cost beyond imagining, and their tanks stop when they hit the sea, because nothing exists to stop them earlier. Every version of that world is worse, considerably worse. He did not do it alone. It was the pilots, the dockers, the factory women, the code breakers at Bletchley, the merchant seamen in the Atlantic, the Poles and Czechs and Canadians and Australians and Indians. The largest volunteer army in history, by the way, was Indian, raised in the country he refused to trust with its own government. One more contradiction for the pile. But without the man in the chair in May 2060 Sork refusing to pick up the phone, none of the rest of them get the chance. And notice what that choice cost him. It is easy to admire Never Surrender Now when you know how it ends. He didn't know. In June 1940, every visible indicator pointed at defeat. He decided anyway, and then performed certainty so convincingly that 48 million people decided to believe him. Was he a racist? By our standards, obviously. By the standards of his own class and generation, unremarkable, and there were contemporaries who argued with him about exactly this, and lost. That is context, not absolution. Both are worth knowing. Was he a drunk? He drank an amount that would put most people in hospital. He also spread it thin across the whole day, worked past midnight for decades, and produced something north of 40 books. The word for that is not alcoholic, and it is not fine either. Was he reckless? Constantly. And the recklessness is exactly why he was any use in Teshetsotsorok. A cautious, balanced, sensible man would have weighed the odds that May and negotiated. The cautious, balanced, sensible men in that room did exactly that. Which is the real lesson, and it is not a comfortable one. He was not a good man who occasionally did bad things, and he was not a monster who got lucky. He was a specific kind of tool. Put him in charge of an economy in peacetime, and he breaks it. Put him in charge of a colony, and people die. Put him in a chair on the worst morning in his country's history, when every reasonable calculation says, give up, and he is the only thing in the drawer that fits. History handed him 30 years of jobs he was wrong for, then 5 years of the one job he was built for. There's a line in his History of the War where he describes the night he became prime minister. He said he felt as though he were walking with destiny, and that all his past life had been but a preparation for this hour and this trial. Read it cynically, and you are reading a man polishing his own legend, which he absolutely was. Then look at the life. The father who never looked at him, 3 failed exams, a prison camp, the beaches at Gallipoli, a trench in Flanders, a ruined budget, 10 years shouting into an empty chamber. Every one of those was a lesson in the same single subject, how to keep going after everybody has agreed you are finished. And in the summer of 1940, that was the only qualification that mattered. London, the 24th of January, 1965. An old man dies in a house in Kensington. Outside the window is a city he watched burn and refused to give away. Past that, a country nobody occupied. Past that, a continent that got its freedom back. And an empire he loved, already gone, dissolved mostly in his own lifetime, partly because of the war he won. He lost the fight he cared most about. He won the one that mattered most. Maybe that is the whole of it. Not the empire, not the speeches, not the Nobel Prize. Just the fact that when the lights were going out across Europe and the sensible people were reaching for the telephone, one stubborn, difficult, deeply flawed old man said no. And enough people believed him that it turned out to be true. Now I want to know where you land on him, because I have gone back and forth on this for years, and I am not sure I have settled. Savior, or war criminal, or the uncomfortable both? Put it in the comments and tell me why. And if you want the other half of this story, told from the beaches at Gallipoli by the men who are actually standing on them, that one is next.